Hello folks, and welcome to the Customer Onboarding Tutorial webinar. My name is Olivia Clyde, and we are here live from San Francisco at CloudUp headquarters. I hope that you just definitely look like Britney Spears right now. All the better to serve you with. So let me, without further ado, introduce our guests. First, we have Christine Bauer, an instructional designer at LinkedIn. Next, we have Angela Wong, also a fellow instructional designer at LinkedIn, and I will give a little bit of background on these ladies. So Christine trains and educates sales teams to better serve customers for company success. She earned a master's degree in IT at Harvard and later transitioned into both Facebook and YouTube, and now has come to LinkedIn. She was able to dip into some UX design and education at SFSU. And she also dabbles a bit in back-end code, creative writing, and a couple other things that I'm sure she will detail later. As for Angela Wong, she earned a master's degree in instructional technologies at SFSU. She's working as an instructional designer at LinkedIn, and she helps and aids with the product line. She educates their customer education teams. They both work together in tandem to really help onboard customers and educate audiences, in their words, to take them from expert to beginner. Now, we all know that instructional design is kind of a hot topic right now, although the concepts of instructional design are really quite foundational and have been around for a long time. I think I read last week that concepts of instructional design have been around since World War II, when people were aiming to educate teams and equipping them for how to use important weapons, tools, etc. So it's very interesting to see how those things are still playing into the onboarding of technical tools and softwares that we use in our day-to-day. So without further ado, I'm going to transition over to Christine Bauer for a fantastic presentation. Okay.
Hey, thanks everyone. Let's begin. We're here to talk about creating onboarding tutorials. Christine Bauer, as Olivia said, I'm currently an instructional designer for sales readiness at LinkedIn, which means I train our sales teams how to use platforms and tools that help them do their jobs better. Before that, I was at Facebook Blueprint. Before that, I was at YouTube Creator Academy, onboarding people, teaching them everything from how to set up microphone equipments to how to tell a great story to how to monetize their channels. And before that, I was teaching front-end code through an online program at General Assembly. So let's begin by talking about what we're going to talk about. We're going to start with a little bit about engaging sales teams, then move along to the research project that goes into every instructional design product. We're going to talk about what makes a tutorial really powerful and effective. And then I'm going to share some of my favorite tools, as well as some industry standard tools and platforms that instructional designers use to help get our messages out there to our learners. So let's start engaging sales teams. Sales folks are so focused on their quota and their compensation. Quota is how much they have to sell, and compensation, of course, refers to bonuses that they get, percentages for selling. And that means that time is really, really money for them. Every minute that they spend not pursuing getting a deal closed is time that they're losing money. Sales folks are competitive and they thrive on recognition. So really respond to things like leaderboards and peer-to-peer connections and peer-to-peer teaching. One thing that has really become very critical recently is this idea between sales training and sales enablement. Sales training tends to be more, here's what you do. Enablement really focuses specifically only on the things that really matter to sales folks. So that's the things that drive the needle really meaningfully on their performance. So enablement looks more like you have opportunities, not just to learn, but also to practice, perform, measure, and receive feedback. And what that looks like is that sales reps want collaboration with peers. They want immediate and continuous feedback, hands-on learning and training that's really practical and relevant to them, and opportunities to practice those skills. So that looks like onboarding, ongoing training post-onboarding, ongoing communications, one-on-ones with their managers to identify skills gaps, and one-on-one coaching. So that's my audience right now. Next, we're going to talk a little about the research process for creating instructional materials. So our first thing, we always start by asking who the audience is. Are they experts? Are they beginners? What do they already know? What do they need to know? So the question here is, what's the key concept or desired behavior change? Do we want people to be better at logging information in the system? Do we want people to be less reliant on support teams? Dan Seidman is a really well-recognized sales enablement professional, and he says that we are in the before and after business, which is to say, if there's not a distinct difference between learners' behavior after they've encountered the training, we've failed at our job. So we need to identify what that desired change is and make it measurable. And again, you know, sales audiences, they really care about relevant and actionable. So we have a term we use called the WIFM, and the WIFM is a what's in it for me. We want to make sure that it's really clear what they're going to get out of the training and how it's going to make them better. And that's not just for sales teams, that's for all audiences, especially if you're doing compliance training, which I've done in the past, where people have to complete this training to do their jobs. But I think it's even more relevant with customers who are paying for your product. They don't want to waste their time, they don't want to waste their money. They really need to know what the value prop is for putting in the time to learn what you're doing. Next up, after we've identified our audience and figured out what we need from them, we need to figure out what we need to give them. So subject matter experts are our stakeholders, they're our lifeblood. We talked a little about where I come from. I've taught everything from front-end web design to marketing to video production. I can't be an expert in all of those. No one can. So as instructional designers, I rely on my subject matter experts. These are the people who live and breathe these topics and these specializations. So I work very closely with SMEs, and they can help me identify, surface, and stack rank what are the most essential topics, skills, knowledge that learners need, and the behavior, and really not just give me, they are the experts, and I translate what they say into beginner or into the level of my learners. They can help me identify the gaps, both in performance and in existing training, behavior changes, and then we talk about how we get to our end goal from where we are now. And there's a couple different ways we can do that. So these are just some of the modes of instruction that are at our fingertips as instructional designers. We can do online or in-person trainings. We can also do blended training. Blended training is kind of what's happening now. It means something is both, you know, online and in person. If there were learners in the room with me right now, it would be blended. But it could also mean taking a live class and then being tested online, or taking an online class and taking a live proctored exam. It's basically a combination of online and in person. Flipped learning, a flipped classroom model is learning. A traditional classroom, you learn in the classroom and then you go home and you do homework and activities and things like that out of the classroom. With the flipped classroom model, we flip that. So you learn at home via e-learning, microlearning, or reading. And then what would normally be homework are in-class guided activities. Synchronous and asynchronous learning. So right now, if you're watching this live, you are having a synchronous learning experience. If you're not watching this live, if you're watching the recording, you know, a week from now, that's an asynchronous learning experience. So it's basically the difference between something that's scheduled and something that's on demand. Contextual and just-in-time learning is it's something that lives in the experience with you. So a tooltip, or is there a really good example, any sort of nudges that live within a software product that like help you figure out your way to do things can be considered just in time. We also use nooks at Facebook. That's what we called our tooltips for new user experience. Microlearning is tiny bite-sized educational. Typically, you're teaching one thing per piece of content, and typically it should take 2 to 7 minutes to complete. So they're pretty small and they're pretty easy to get through. After you've figured out how you want to teach it, let's talk a little bit more about getting tactical on the methods you can use. There's, technical writing, which could be a one-pager, it could be a knowledge base or a help article. Videos can be a screencast, talking head, webinar, animations. E-learning could be a full-length course, or it could be a small micro interaction, something swipeable or clickable, typically with a knowledge check or a quiz. And just in time, again, that follows you around the experience. It is hopefully unobtrusive. I don't know if anyone here is old enough to remember Microsoft's Clippy. We don't want the just in time experience following you around and be like, hey, it looks like you're trying to do this. That's weird, that's intrusive. But there are really great ways to make just in time learning really applicable and friendly. So let's get into the nitty gritty of how to create a tutorial. I mentioned learning objectives a moment ago, and those are key. Learning objectives are how we as instructional designers capture what the goal of the training is. We want to use really strong verbs. We want to say you want to be able to locate or distinguish or evaluate. It's not just understand how to do something. Understand is a pretty lazy learning objective. Learning objectives should also be really measurable. So one of my favorite formulas for creating a learning objective is given A, learners should be able to B as demonstrated by C. So it'd be like, after finishing this training, the customer will be able to complete an order in the system without help from our sales teams, as demonstrated by an X% reduction in abandoned shopping carts, or as measured by a Y% reduction in help cases. So you build the end goal into the learning objective. You make it as measurable as you can. And again, that's putting the Y right up front. So we also have this idea of you can teach, see, do, certify. It's really important to reinforce the learning by delivering it in multiple ways. There is an idea of learning styles, which is actually really controversial in education. But basically the idea is some people are visual learners who learn by seeing, others are kinesthetic learners who see by doing. What we do know is whether or not learning styles are real, it's really helpful to teach the same thing in different ways. It makes it stickier, it gives people more hooks in their brain to hang up concepts on. And just repetition and reinforcement are so important. We say by the time you're sick of saying it, people are finally just starting to hear it. So really it's about tell them what you're going to tell them, tell it to them, and then tell them that you told it to them. And so when we get into the tactical building out of content, the process is basically we'll create storyboards, we'll pull together media and other assets, we'll look at technical solutions, anything that needs to be animated or video, make sure those are all squared away. And the whole time we're working so closely with our subject matter experts. We're sending them content for review to make sure everything is accurate and complete, nothing is misleading or incorrect at every stage of the process. Okay, and so when I gave a version of this talk a few years ago, this was the part that everyone got really excited about, which was sort of my quick tips for creating content. So some of those tips are watch your voice and tone. The more complex your ideas are, the simpler language you should use to express it in. Keep it short, be friendly, be encouraging, and try to match the tone to the product experience. People really respond when they don't feel like they're being condescended to or talked professorially down to. That's not a good user experience. You want to keep it really, really friendly and encourage people to learn more. And on that note, keep it positive. Don't say don't. It's much nicer to say, hey, here's a cool way to do this, or here's a thing that might happen, rather than, it's not hard, because it might be hard for someone. So we just want to keep it light, keep it easy. Don't, scare people off in your introductory experience. And use story. Narrative plus proof plus lesson is a really, really nice formula. So narrative is share a real world experience to build a human connection. Proof is details. And you can see this pattern. Stories are how we passed on really important information for thousands of years, and stories work really well. Use scenarios, use case studies, use what ifs. Get people to put themselves in there and make them the hero of the story. Better yet, make your product or your service the hero of the story. That's every infomercial ever. What's the narrative? Have you ever tried to do this thing? And the proof, oh, but wait, here's the thing that can do it. And the lesson, wrap everything up into an actionable conclusion. It's tried, it's true. Use emotion and redundancy. Humor, surprise, and delight drive engagement. And I told you a few slides back, I'm telling you again, repeat yourself. It increases retention. And now let's get a little tactical. Tools of the trade. Ways to deliver your learning. We talked a little earlier about some of these. You have a couple options for video, live action, animations, screencasts, interactive e-learnings, digital adoption platforms, which can live, again, in your product or experience and give people nudges and help them to move through the experience. And finally, delivery systems. So you may be familiar with content management systems such as WordPress. We also have learning management systems, or LMSs. And so let's get started. So for video, I have a couple examples of some neat ways to do things. So this is what, I'm gonna try to play them for you. This is what Camtasia looks like. And this is actually a tutorial. Oh, oops. This is crap. This is actually a tutorial built in Camtasia that teaches you how to use Camtasia. So it's a really great way to do screencasts. And you can, zoom in, zoom out, highlight things, have arrows. It's just a really nice way to share how to use a software program. Another tool that we use is called Beyond, and you've probably seen Beyond tutorials. They're really fun. Right.
There we
okay.
go.
So here's a Beyond video. This is what it looks like. You've probably seen these guys hanging out. But they're these fun little animated characters. It's really easy to drag and drop and create these really slick looking videos with not a lot of energy or effort. So that's another option. Camtasia also does live video editing as well. So that's one of our tools. Another tool is the Articulate suite. And so there's a couple different tools within it. What we're looking at right now is Rise, which is like an interactive textbook almost. You can have quizzes, you can have videos, you can have interactions. Articulate Studio is like a PowerPoint that you can click through with interactions as well. And Storyline can have a choose your own adventure element where you have different branching scenarios. And the Articulate suite is only available for PC. If you're on a Mac, you'll need to partition your hard drive. So Captivate is an Adobe product that does basically all of the things that the Articulate Studio can do. It also has some fun additional features, I believe. So let's share a little peek at Captivate. So this is a virtual reality experience that you can do through Captivate, and you can have, yeah, isn't that fun? So that's a really neat tool for folks who are working on VR products and want to be able to build a tutorial like that directly into their tools. And next up, we have reinforcement tools that could be something that lives inside your product, so like a tooltip or a chat box. We also have digital adoption platforms and user adoption platforms. One example of that is a product called WalkMe. And the way that this works is, this is pretty pricey, but WalkMe is a little thing that lives in your product, and you say help, and it just sort of guides you through the experience. So you tell it what you want it to do, and it'll tell you where to click and how to go through your process. So it's sort of like having someone helpful just sort of over your shoulder, not Clippy-esque, but sort of Clippy light. And so that's a really great tool as well. When we talk about platforms, you can, use something like Udemy or Skillshare or LinkedIn Learning if you're video only. There are, I believe, WordPress plugins that can turn the CMS that is WordPress into an LMS and have quizzes and have some sort of LMS light e-learning experiences happening in the tool. There are also dedicated LMSs. So Moodle is the one I'm going to show off because it is free and it is open source, which is why it's used often by schools and colleges. And I'm going to start this at 20 seconds in because that's where we really get into what the interface looks like. So this is an example of you have your courses, you have your course progress, you have quizzes in there, and you have a mobile app so you can do this all on the go. Most of these do have mobile experiences and social elements to them. So you can go and take quizzes and do all that fun stuff, that fun learning stuff. And then finally, specifically for sales teams, there are sales enablement platforms. And these tend to focus more on training people on sort of soft skills and such. But let's get into the interface a little here. So this is almost, I love this interface. It's almost like Super Mario World or something. So you go through the map, and at each stop you have different quizzes, you have educational videos, and you really have these like reinforcement mechanisms. It also has a feature where you can record screencasts. And so, for example, you can give a pitch on how you'd sell a product, and then your manager can watch that video and say, okay, you've got this skill down, or actually you might need a little more coaching on this other part of the job. So this is sort of the back end view of that. And that's another tool we've got in our arsenal. And that takes us to the end of my deck.
Wow, well done, Christine.
Thanks.
Everyone, feel free to give a little light round of applause. We can't hear you from Nebraska, but if we could. That That was phenomenal. I'm sure the guests have been submitting questions. We have plenty for you. We can kick off. So Wesley, one of the guests for this webinar, he asked, is there a way to gauge the audience? Any kind of leading questions that you can ask?
Yeah, so to take a step back about where I step in for the customer education that we do. So a lot of the resources that I help support are actually on-demand self-service resources. So that takes shape in either HTML tip sheets or webinars. So RSVPing to webinars or yeah. So it can be difficult because you don't really know until they demand the resource, know like who they are, what persona they are, what their needs are. So if they do a webinar, for example, you can reach out to them. Actually, sorry, to take a step back, we have, this is one of the challenges that we have, is knowing who our audience is. So when we market our learning materials, we really have to preface, you know, who would benefit from this learning. So be upfront with the value prop, be upfront with who the appropriate persona would be. And from there, it's up to the users or the learning audience to decide if it's right for them. So going back to what Christine mentioned earlier, when you're doing building learning for an internal audience, for example, if you're doing compliance training for a company, it's easy to engage those kind of learners because, you know, their managers will just tap their shoulders and, hey, make sure you get this training done. But when you're creating customer education, you know, you have an external facing audience, you have to organically and motivate them to complete the training. So first, it's really hard to get them in the door and then keep them in the room. I see Christine nodding your head. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, it's definitely a different world, training internal, creating employee training, which I'm doing now. Again, it's almost like cheating because I have not only a great handle on my learners and what level they're at, but I can also typically managers would be my subject matter experts. So I can go to the managers and I can say, what are the gaps? What do your employees need to be trained on? What kind of resources do your team need? When I was creating training at, you know, Blueprint or Facebook, where I was creating free training for free products, it was definitely a lot more challenging scoping the work and also thinking about creating resources for like beginner, intermediate, and expert audiences.
Wow, thank you both. Very, very good insights from both of you, Angela and Christine. Okay, thank you, Wesley. Next question, we have one. It says, do you write scripts for your tutorials? If so, what's the process for that script writing?
Yeah, I can start with that. We definitely write scripts. We do not wing it. We try not to wing it. And they're sort of the process. So we'll start with scripts and storyboards, and we'll send those to our subject matter experts for review. We definitely, you know, outline curriculums. We do have a very defined process for that. There are a couple different schools of thought. There is a workflow called ADDIE, which is analyze, design, develop, iterate, and evaluate. There's another more agile method called SAM, which is a successive approximation model, which is sort of built to like be a little more rapid and to work more smoothly with agile development. But regardless, there's always rounds of review, and there's always sort of a progression and prototypes toward a more complete course.
Interesting. Thank you, Christine. Okay, next we have someone who asked, training externally for your customer base, are there any tool tips you can provide to help engage customers that aren't proactively learning or engaged in that implementation process? Maybe Angela, you have a thought?
Yeah, I wouldn't say there are specific tools that would really benefit or really help you in this area. What would really help are certain kind of methods you could do. For example, what I mentioned earlier, being really upfront about who the appropriate audience is, letting them know which persona fits the learning material, be really upfront about the value prop, keeping it really short and sweet. People have very short attention spans, so you want to keep it tight. And you always want to end with a call to action. Don't just leave them hanging. Don't do a knowledge dump and then not tell them where to go after that. Yeah, so practicing instructional design in that way will really help you with customer education. Yeah, trying to think. For example, one thing that like our team has been really interested in using for Medium is videos, because videos are easy, they're digestible, they can be very responsive, and I'm really interested. This is my personal thing. I like videos that actually have that are interactive. So I believe with, for example, Camtasia, you have the ability to create interactive videos where you can kind of plug different moments to put a pop-up question or something to test the learner's ability to digest the content. I think, Christine, you probably work with this tool a little bit more than I do. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, that's definitely something you can do in Camtasia. You can add hotspots. So for example, if you can have like, you know, panning over the interface and then like a pause and like, which button would you click to do the next thing? Come up, and then they can tap on the video in the right place. And depending on whether they answered correctly or incorrectly, we could have sort of different responses to that. So that's a really cool feature of interactive video.
Awesome, thank you both. Okay, next are, how detailed are your storyboards? I'm sure people are wondering, do you keep it to a general overview or kind of go into the weeds with them?
For our team, there are a lot of cross-functional partners involved when it comes to making a video. First, I'll just kind of dump out all the people involved with making a video tutorial. So there's the actual video producer themselves, and then there's the content writer, which is where I typically fall under. And then we have our SMEs. So we have a whole Tiger team, like a power team of SMEs that we rely on to create the content, or help me create the content. And on top of that, because our LinkedIn products are globally facing, we have to localize all of our content. So it gets translated across multiple languages. So given that, our particular storyboards are pretty detailed because they have to make sense not only within our own domestic regions, but across the globe and what have you. But for us, this is just how we've been doing. We just use PowerPoint because it's the most easily accessible to not just the video producer, but to people who aren't as tech savvy. So for example, our cross-functional partners, most of them know how to use PowerPoint. So we just use that as our typical storyboard medium. As to how the storyboards are actually structured, you know, you always have the content, and then you have some kind of illustrative image to indicate what you want to actually appear on the screen. And then you also dictate how much time is dedicated to each screen or frame. And yeah, and there's an iterative process where we get many rounds of feedback, and until we get everyone happy, then we'll finalize it, translate it, release it to the masses.
Wow. Sounds like a very all-encompassing process. You guys are meeting every single baseline for that. So, and with that, you mentioned how video can be important aspects, but keeping it to PowerPoint, which is nice, that people, it's just, that's the tool that is the neutralizer, I'd say. So it's good for you guys. And with that, Cloud App is, like you've seen, it's a video recording platform. It's a software for screen recording that you can use to capture and easily embed things like video, rich media content that are very visual into any location. So whether it's a Google Doc, an email, a tutorial, a PowerPoint presentation, it's a fantastic way to speed up that process and still keep your documents engaging. So our next question for either Christine or Angela, we have from Matt. It says, my sector of the SaaS industry has a difficult time getting clients to actually attend scheduled onboarding sessions that they often schedule themselves or over the phone with me. What would you guys recommend to help make them show up to that meeting?
Boy, you're not the only one that deals with this challenge. I'm aware that it's happening with our team too, but I'm actually not the person that has been involved with kind of helping with that. Give me a moment to think about that actually. But I don't know if Christine, if you have anything.
Yeah, I can jump in a little. So I think part of just getting people to show up to training is making it easy for them to show up to training and making it important for them to show up to training. So I don't know sort of what tools you're using, Matt. We definitely want to get sort of manager buy-in on training. We want to make it really urgent for people to attend. We want to give a really clear what's in it for me and how the learner will absolutely benefit from this training, and make that really concrete to them, make it really relevant to them. And it's the hard thing with synchronous scheduled training is keeping that appointment. If it has to happen in person, if there's a way to make it potentially asynchronous, we talk about anything where there's like a human being talking at other human beings is something that we refer to as instructor-led training, or ILT. I recently delivered a course that was VILT, which is virtual instructor-led training, which was definitely scheduled and, you know, mandatory. But people could attend it from anywhere. So that's it. That's, you know, an option. We also recorded that so people, if they were, you know, traveling or unavailable, could take it asynchronously. Figuring out how to figure out who was where. So sort of tracking metrics of how much of the learning experience people absorb, tracking metrics of how engaged they were in it when they were there. Also just things like, you know, prizes. Another tool, another engagement method I didn't talk about was for in-person trainings. We have, there's a tool called Kahoot that's really fun. You can ask people questions, that you have them pull out your cell phone, go to this URL, answer this question, hit this button. And they can do it from anywhere as long as they're logged in at the right URL. And we give prizes sometimes to people who win the most points at Kahoots. That's something that can get them through the door, even if it's just like some company swag. And things like, you know, leaderboards, engagements, those sorts of things can be really effective in getting people through the door for sure. I don't know, Angela, did you?
Yeah, a couple things popped up in my mind. If you have the luxury of having a direct relationship with your clients, if you can maybe appoint an ambassador or advocate or program leader for your product or service to serve as someone to motivate their org to join the session. So if you can appoint someone to be your cheerleader and encourage them to partner with the team's managers, you know, if you can build that partnership and get them to say, hey, you really need to do this training, this onboarding, you'll have someone on your client side to help you out in that area. But if you don't have the luxury of having a direct relationship with your clients, there are other methods of trying to make it easier for them to come back to your training. For example, if it was a webinar session that they RSVP'd to and they didn't make it, you can send a follow-up email saying, hey, sorry, we missed you. Here's a link to see other opportunities to join the session again, and a quick blurb about why they should, the value prop. Yeah.
Cool. I love that idea of appointing a liaison, whether it's there in person or online. It's very smart to cover those bases. Thank you, Matt. Next question is from Jay. It says, what is the ideal length for a video? For an online live training class, for either of those. And then he goes on to elaborate saying, thinking about audience attention span, if the content to be taught is longer, how do you split it up to diversify it and keep it succinct?
I forget the exact number or the last time I saw this number, but I'm just going to ballpark it and say it takes only about 4 to 7 seconds for a person to drop off from any video, regardless if it's instructional or any video. Like if you've ever surfed YouTube, it only takes about 3 seconds for you to decide whether or not you want to continue. The same will apply to an on-demand learning video. So really leverage the first 3 seconds to engage your audience. That's where you really want to push forward that hook. And again, if you can manage to do so in that first 3 seconds, the value prop, who the appropriate persona is, and from there, you know, if they bought into the value prop, maybe you've earned another 5 seconds with them. So you just want to keep, you know, making sure that you're demonstrating value to them and making it easy for them.
Interesting. Wow, 3 seconds, shorter than we all thought or hoped.
That was definitely something that when I was creating training for YouTube, telling people how to capture attention, we advised them like to use those first couple of seconds like really, really effectively to like hook the viewer. I recently saw an attention span curve in the context of microlearning, and it started here at like 0 minutes, and it was like, and then it hit about like 9 minutes, and it went, whoom. So we talk about microlearning as being sort of 2 to 7 minute videos, and that is definitely like tightly within that like high attention curve for consuming video. I would say if you have training that goes longer in terms of a full course or something, just make sure you like rehook people every sort of like 7 to 8 minutes. Give them some kind of interaction, something to do, some, you know, like not necessarily like the Netflix, like, are you still watching? But but just like absolutely try to like rehook them and re-engage them, you know, with frequency. Microlearning may say 1 learning objective per module, so keep those modules like tight, like, you know, 5 minutes. I wouldn't, you know, try to do an 8 minute, you know, video without some kind of like engagement or hook there. But you definitely just want to keep folks engaged, keep them, you know, be a little interruptive if you have to, but don't let them drop off.
I want to quickly add to what Christine said. Oh,
next question. Oh, yeah, Angela, go ahead, please.
Oh, no, just really quickly. So where she mentioned, you know, breaking it up with interactions. I just wanted to add, if you can make those interactions, make it an opportunity for the audience to practice what you preached, and then once they practice it, give them feedback so you can kind of fine tune their learning performance. So just adding that.
Yes, that reminds me of what Christine touched on with the ABC, showing them why they should do it, how they can do it, and demonstrated by that final C. Interesting. Okay, next question is, we don't have a lot of resources to create or approve content. Do you have any key tips for smaller content teams? No producers or approvals. Also, and how often do you update your content? And this person says that they're just kind of scared. That's going to take a lot of time to keep it continuous. So again, we don't have a lot of resources to create or approve. Do you have any tips for the smaller teams trying to do that?
Yeah, this is a very universal problem, but 2 things that come to mind is be very mindful about what your MVP is. Like, what is the most minimal viable product that you need to get away with to make an impact on your learning audience. And then also I think it is really useful if you kind of establish a tiger team of people that will help you at your org. For example, you know, you probably are not the SME in the content that you're going to help create. So if you can maybe designate someone to be your SME consistently, or at least schedule ahead of time like who that person would be, set expectations, and then power through it from there. I want to add more, but I need to give a moment to think about it. And then the second question for how often do you update your content? So before a year ago, it used to be pretty ad hoc. So our engineering and product teams, they would make changes to the product without letting us know internally. And we would have to either hear it from our customers before we got to hear about it. And how can we teach our customers how to use the product appropriately if we don't even know how to use it ourselves? So it was kind of an issue, not only here at LinkedIn, but across many, many other organizations. But about a year ago, we started doing quarterly releases. So now the engineering team and product team won't release updates until they give us a quarter notice. And that has been such a game changer for us. Yeah. So, go ahead.
I would definitely say, yeah, like this is a place where your subject matter experts, your SMEs, can make a huge difference. If you have a really good relationship with your subject matter experts, they will let you know when things need to be updated. And I definitely have worked in other at other positions, past positions, where I would have SMEs proactively reach out to me and be like, hey, we're about to update like the Facebook pixel or something. And let's have a kickoff meeting to like schedule like when that could get updated. And, you know, sometimes I would be like, all right, well, here's my, you know, the work that I have to, you know, push out in the next like 3 months, and let's see where we can fit that in there timing wise. It's not always super easy, like especially in small shops, when the instructional designer, and one of the reasons I was sort of like drawn to instructional design is because I have a background in creative writing, I have a background in front-end web development, I have a background in graphic design, and so there was an appeal to me in sort of this specialty that allowed me to be a generalist. And on a small team, that's kind of how it is. You kind of have to do every little thing. One way to do sort of prioritize and stack rank content is, as Angela said, know your MVP. Have sort of a good, better, and best version of every piece of training. Think about what's the least you can do. If you know content is going to change in the next, you know, month or in the next quarter, maybe it's a, you know, just-in-time PDF and not full e-learning experience. If you know something is pretty hard-baked and it's not going to change, maybe then you commit the resources to do like a video or a course on like, so something like a webinar. In some cases, we've had, you know, trainings that we really wanted to make a full e-learning course, but because the product wasn't stable, we decided, oh, well, let's just do like an in-person instructor-led training or a webinar where we can like even bring our SMEs into the training room and have them like available to answer questions. So there's so many ways to do it, and to do it like really tight, and to do it like with minimal resources.
And I think
Great. Angela, did you have anything to say?
Oh, sorry, just really quickly.
Sure.
And I think what will really help guide you in knowing what your MVP is to think about what's the call to action. For example, maybe they don't need to know all the details that go behind why they should be performing a certain action, but just telling them, if you do A, you will really benefit from it by getting B. That would be your MVP, just telling them what that call to action is sometimes, and then add more color to it with what the instructional, add more color by adding more instructional piece behind it. But.
Right. Matt Beller asks, he says, I work closely with our clients to get as much product adoption as possible while still doing onboarding. Even when they promise that they'll accomplish certain goals, he still sees that they're making little progress and saying, I'm too busy. That's the excuse that comes out of it. And he says, how can I truly hold them accountable to adopt product tools in a timely manner?
Yeah, so I think this is something that's really important to think about. So what entails actually a learning need and what actually entails like logistical challenges. For example, people don't have time. If we're talking about using instruction or learning to have a solution for this, it might not be the best fit. It might be a matter of if your client has the luxury of having, for example, a customer support person to hold their hand as they onboard, that customer support person could maybe offer tips and best practices for how to schedule time for completing the learning. So it's not really on the learning end, but it's more on the logistical end of things, if that makes sense.
I like that. Thank you. And an anonymous user asked, what are some job opportunities for future instructional designers? Interesting.
There's so many. So I personally have a habit of checking job opportunities every day. Like I check my stocks and my weather, not because I'm actually actively looking. It's just so fascinating to see what the opportunity landscape looks like. It's changed so much in the last couple of years. Overall, it's just expanded so much. And keep in mind that people might be seeking for instructional designers, but they might be labeling differently. For example, we're looking for experience designer or learning experience designers, or we're looking for curriculum writers, or we're looking for content writers, or what have you, but they're actually looking for something else. Overall, I feel like there's a lot. If you just go to all the major job boards, LinkedIn, Google, Indeed, this is not sponsored. I'm just, yeah.
So there's a lot out there, and there's a lot of different titles. There's, like content developer or LMS, coordinator. There are customer success managers for some various, like vendors of things. And yeah, like Angela, I'm not looking, but I definitely get pinged like on the very regular by recruiters, because instructional designer is not a really well-known field, and it's a very in-demand field. So I could, like name drop like Uber, Apple, Sephora, like everyone kind of wants us. So it's definitely a good field to be in. And there's a lot of opportunities out there. There's a lot of different angles you can come at instructional design from. And that's one of my favorite things, actually. When I meet other instructional designers, I always ask them, like, what did you actually study? Because I've known people who are like anthropology majors, neurobiology majors, journalists. People come to instructional design from so many different backgrounds. And I think it really sort of enriches the field to have all of these experiences.
Wow, and it's definitely interesting to hear about just the guys. You have to be watching out for how people are phrasing it and positioning it. Great. So can you go back to the voice and tone? This is referring to Christine's presentation about how to not talk down to an audience. Maybe give a couple more examples to avoid saying things that just kind of make them a little inferior, or phrases to use to not.
Yeah, I mean, I think I captured some of those on the slide, which I believe will be sent out and available after this. But yeah, you just want to be friendly, and you want to assume knowledge, but you also don't want to assume too much knowledge. So that's one of the reasons it's really important to know your audience really well. There are sort of tricks you can use to sort of like, you can have content that's hidden and they can click into it to learn more if they need to learn more. But basically just, assume people are smart and talk like you're talking to your friends. A lot of times I remember when I would do like writing tutorial, I would like tutor people on writing when I was in college. And a lot of the time people tend to write more formally than they speak. So they would have a sentence and it's very stodgy. And I'd be like, okay, well, what does that actually mean? And they would tell me in plain English. And I'd be like, yes, write that. So sort of, pick a person that, you think is smart, and talk like you're talking to them is a good trick. Just keep sort of like optimism in the writing voice, little sense of humor, keep it clean, um, and just sort of like assume intelligence and assume you're talking to a friend. I'm sure Angela, coming from a content-driven background, has some tips and tricks as well.
Yeah, you want to use as simple language as possible. Not only because that makes it more friendly, it also makes it more accessible across different audiences. Don't use jargon, don't use, yeah, and keep it friendly. You know, in the end, you are kind of selling a product, and you want to keep the language friendly to keep people warm to the product. Oh, Olivia, you're on mute.
Great. So how does customer success play into instructional design? It's a great question. Customer success is the all-inclusive role about how to keep customers happy and be proactive as you try to help them meet their goals with your product, except it's not so much a focus on that product as much as it is on them. So maybe Christina or Angela, you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, for customer success, I think instructional design kind of falls under it in that. So under customer success, a piece of it would be helping your audience learn the product, but there are other pieces too, like for example, assigning who would be like the admin that will enable the product within the team, or who would be the liaison for all the communications and the marketing. And then another piece is the learning. So empowering the audience with tips and best practices for not only using the product, but using the product really well. And that's where instructional design would come in. I don't know, I would like the question to be a bit more specific. I don't know if I'm answering the question appropriately, but.
Well, yeah, you did a great job to me. The person hasn't sent a follow-up, so.
I can also add, I've worked with customer success managers from products that that my teams use in the past. So the vendors will send customer success managers like to give a lecture to make sure we're using it. If we have a question about like how to launch this thing in the product, we can reach out to our customer success manager and they will talk and walk us through it. So there is a definite sense in which CSMs are performing instructional functions. I don't know that it's their sole function. There's sort of marketing and other elements in there. But I think really great customer success managers are also really great instructors and teachers.
Very true. Yeah. And just to give more context about, like, for example, how my team operates, we leverage our customer success manager. Like Christine said, they are our SMEs. They are the ones that are actually facing customers. They know very insightfully what challenges the customers have, and they can help us identify, okay, is it a logistical challenge or is it a learning challenge? If it's a learning challenge, great, tell me more, and together we'll kind of build content that will help them.
And then someone has a question about the research that your team is gathering. So how does your team of designers synthesize the data, insights, and research that they receive from whether it's product or engineering teams, etc.?
Yeah, we have different streams for getting data. I think the most valuable is actually the CSMs or any customer-facing internal rep, because they know exactly in detail, in personal detail, what challenges there are that learning can help address. But aside from that, other things that we leverage is data on active usage. So for example, what parts of the product are being underused and how is that preventing them from using it more? We'll have to identify, okay, are they not using it because they don't find it useful, or because they don't know how to use it, or they don't know if it exists? If it's a case that they know it exists and they want to use it, they just don't know how, that's where we come in and provide some instruction around that. Other things we use, for example, when we create our videos, we check our hit and completion rates to see, or the drop-off rates. That will kind of tell us, which videos worked better than others and why.
And when I'm working with subject matter experts, we'll typically try to schedule a kickoff meeting, and we'll ask them to provide us, in addition, like before that kickoff, with any like product documentation or fact sheets or any resources that they have, and give us access to the product so we can get in there and play with it. And we use that kickoff meeting to sort of say, okay, based on the material I have, here's what I think is the most important thing to teach. Here's the order I think that we can present it in that makes the most sense. And if we're refreshing existing training, it may just be like reviewing that with them. The questions that I love asking subject matter experts are, what's wrong? What's confusing? What's missing? And what's in here that doesn't need to be in here? So really rely on our SMEs to help us sort of prioritize, stack rank, and vet the accuracy of the content that we're producing.
Fantastic. All right, ladies, I think that concludes the question portion for this webinar. You both have done a wonderful job instructing us, and this has been a valuable experience by far. Angela, thank you so much for joining us from afar. We appreciate your expertise. You did a great job. And Christine, thank you for that wonderful presentation. It wasn't hard to understand that it was getting that audience going. Many questions. And Christine, I believe you're from Boston, or you at least lived there. Is that right? We'll be making our way there this coming week. So
oh, that's
you
exciting.
Could tell us where to get the best chowder. Chowder, sorry.
I sure can. Yeah, it's the best time of year to be in Boston. Wait another month and it'll be like miserably cold.
Oh, good to know. Thank you. All right. Thank you, ladies, again. Thank you to our guests for joining. We will see you next time on another Cloud App webinar. Signing off from San Francisco.